Serious, former gang members of Reddit, what was it like being in a gang? How were you initiated, and what kind of things did you see and do? I tell people I know today that I was a completely different person when I was younger. Sometimes even I can't believe that I was ever involved in gang life. Keep in mind this was well over a decade ago. I was in a mixed-race gang, however the majority were Hispanic. It started as a group of friends needing protection from other gangs, but progressed into just plain old criminal behavior. It was exciting to run from cops, cause trouble and occasionally dodge bullets, but really to a bunch of poor and poorly educated kids to be part of something bigger than ourselves with a feeling of family. It felt good. Getting in was getting ranked in by getting your ass kicked for 30 seconds by whoever was already in the gang, and wanted to participate at the time, which was usually between 5 to 10 members versus 1. Most days were spent getting high, cruising lowriders around looking for hyenas or slanging dope or looking to hit a lick or starting shit with rivals, but mostly just chilling. A life of crime though has consequence, so rap sheets got long and jail was just another place to go. It was also a dangerous life though, lots of injuries, and too many deaths of some of my closest friends. But after my best friend was murdered and my son was born, I made a change. I didn't find Jesus or any religion. I found logic and reason, moved far away from all the bullshit. I still keep in contact with one or two of my old homeboys, but most of them are dead, in jail, or strung out. Gang life is bullshit, but when you're poor and defenseless sometimes it's just the way it is. I joined a gang when I was 14. We were considered shorties to the actual big bad gang in East Chicago, with a chance to be jumped in and marked, a tattoo on your right calf, at 16. Basically we were a bunch of wannabes. There were a couple big shit older kids who were our mentors, my big brother among them, but for the most part it was a bunch of 12, 13 and 14 years olds playing at badasses. But it gave me what I needed during that time: camaraderie. My family had just moved out of the projects of Gary, Indiana, as a half-white/half Puerto Rican who looked all white. That was not fun at all, and to a little neighborhood right outside of Gary. I had no friends, we were still incredibly poor, and to top it off, my father had just been diagnosed with lung cancer. My other major male role model, my grandfather, was confined to a chair in our living room, slowly dying of depression and a rising number of strokes. Life sucked. The gang changed that, for a little while. I had friends again. After 2.5 years of every peer around me treating me with contempt because of the color of my skin, even the one kid I considered a friend treated me like shit when other people were around. Having friends, being part of a group, I'd have done any amount of shitty gang banging for that feeling. It didn't matter that I had very little in common with any of these people besides the fact that we were all poor. We did some bad things, broke into a few houses, and beat the living hell out of one poor bastard for betraying our trust, and that summer ended with me doing a 2-month-long stint in the Lake County Juvenile Center, which made living in the projects seem like a wet dream. But for the most part we just hung out together and acted like kids who were trying to act like they were too mature to act like kids. We'd smoke cigarettes thanks to a 19-year-old member of the gang, who was my best friend at the time, but looking back, he was a complete and utter loser. Talk about banging chicks, talk about kicking the asses of rival gang members or the asshole jocks at school. Talk about how badass we'd be when we got to join the real gang in a couple years. In hindsight I realize we were all just ghetto nerds, who had banded together for the sake of banding together. It was a brotherhood that I didn't know I desperately needed until I had it. They were there at my father's funeral, they were there at my grandfather's funeral. They were there, basically. I come from the hood. My mom was in a gang back in the 60s and that's where she met my dad. They were in the SWATs because, apparently that had to do with death. I never asked them if they murdered anyone, but I hope not. Anyways, I grew up hoping to join a gang. I was young and stupid. I joined the Cracker Packers, mainly because my friends did. The classic monkey see monkey do scenario. I've been jailed 3 times for battery and was too afraid to quit for 4 years. Finally quit the Cracker Packers last year. Feels liberating. I was in one of the groups during the period linked above. I was initiated by basically going to work for them. Our little subgroup was run by a Vietnamese dude. Most guys made money from growing weed, smuggling weed, running phones, delivery line for crack, heroin and powdered coke. Usually these workers would sell weed on their own at the same time. I had grow houses, worked a phone for a while. I also used to find people who were social butterflies and get them to sell stuff for me. Like if somebody had a little weed dealing business, I'd force them to buy wholesale off me if they weren't affiliated with anybody. I'd also try to get them selling blow and D since their customer base usually wanted those, cheaper and better quality than they were paying usually, so often I didn't need to threaten them. It was an interesting time in my life. Sometimes if a guy would get into a fight at a club, I'd get a call at like 1 AM to go get his back, and we'd have like 100 guys show up to put the boots to a group of maybe 10 guys, who were starting shit. For a young guy it was honestly awe-inspiring. You get into a fight with some cocky douchebags at a club, and with a couple phone calls you have a bunch of dudes arriving in luxury cars to get your back. Most of the guys in those days came from nice middle-class homes, so when the cops really started cracking down hard on gang activity, lots of guys just got jobs, or moved out of the Vancouver area to grow weed. I work in the legal end of the commercial medical cannabis industry now, so luckily some of my skills transferred over. Lots of guys ended up in the oil patch, for some reason many became car salesmen. I was 80 East Side Skyline Pyru, one of the original sets that made up the Bloods. I joined up when I was 13. Got jumped in by 5 OYGs for 30 seconds then given my flag. I did the usual gang banged, jumped people, robbed people, shot people, ducked hose, sold dope. Became somewhat known because I was Middle Eastern and not black so people took notice. At first it was cool but then I noticed I caught the wrong people's attention for the wrong reasons. I was active up until I was 21 almost at YOG status. I stopped because I moved every few years and everywhere I went I noticed Bloods and Crips, and every city a different knowledge, gang history you're taught prior to initiation. For instance on the West Coast it's more of a block thing everyone knows the big homies, so if you claim you're part of a set and people approach, that set's big homie and he don't know you, that's your ass. On the East Coast it's UBN, United Blood Nation, and it's ran like the mob rather than OGs YOG YG and BG they have bosses and capos. UBN knowledge starts with how the Millers made a NYC connection, and the 9 Tray set was started in the 90s completely different from what I was told. When I went to the South I seen that the Crips had gangster disciple knowledge, and Bloods had vice lord knowledge and most of their sets were non-existent in the West Coast. The gang shit is hella flimsy. I left that life alone, and I have a family now and own my own businesses. But sometimes these young bitch-made mother duckers step up, and I have to let them know who the F they're talking to. When I was living in Chicago I ran with some Latin kings. I wasn't gang banging but ended up dating someone who did and hung around with his group of friends. It was crazy. I watched him sell crack to the people in his own neighborhood. The cops not only knew them by name and alias, but when we all got caught trespassing at an elementary school at 11 p.m., one of the cops asked how one of the queens had been doing since she had calmed down. Our nights consisted of walking the neighborhoods for hours trying to find something to do, like throwing up the crowd at passing cars to see if they were a rival gang or not. So many of the girls were extremely young, like 15 to 20 and had already had a kid or two by a king that's at least 5 years her senior. The kings have a certain date in January where all the local chapters meet up in the park and have a picnic. There's a salute that involves putting your right hand over your heart and reciting something out of a Bible all whilst facing the sun. It was blood in, blood out. To get initiated, the males or females have to get beaten on for about 30 seconds by 5 to 10 members. They had weekly meetings and if someone didn't attend them it would be considered a violation, and they would have to stand against a wall and let the other members beat them up for 15 seconds. For women, they could be beaten in, or they could F the entire gang. The women who chose the latter would lose all respect of the gang and to humiliate them, the kings would turn them away. Getting out of the gang for girls was easy if they became pregnant. Not even the most ruthless of the kings wanted a pregnant queen gang banging on Bryn Mawr. What got me is how they preach about loyalty, but everyone is trying to F everyone else's man or woman. At the end I couldn't deal with the fear that my house would get raided and I'd go to jail for possession of crack cocaine. I never knew if who I was with was carrying a gun or drugs, which they always were. Not knowing if my boyfriend was going to come home in one piece or not was too much, and I called it quits. I'm still really good friends with one of the queens. They can be genuinely amazing people that just get caught up in a crazy situation. They took me in and treated me like family, when they barely knew me, but that's really all the good I have to share. I wasn't a banger, but I did do some drug muling for an older Italian fraternal organization. I watched someone that I looked at like a father put a gun to a cop's head and pulled the trigger twice. I got out after watching a cop executed from about 25 feet away. I was a fall guy, because I was still a minor, so was never initiated. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, and it's been close to 15 years. There was only one upside, I got off the hard drugs I was on that day cold turkey. I was born into a club with my dad/father/sperm donor being a charter member. I'm his son, so technically I'm a member. My dad was, as I was growing up, semi-inactive, or so he said. He was a scout leader, football coach, hockey supporter, and all about great father. He made sure my head was in a place his wasn't. I went to prep schools my whole life, then to one of the best colleges the US has to offer in engineering. It was all paid for by him. Then finally, after messing it all up on my own, joined his trade, legit skilled trade. I've had a great life. His life wasn't like mine, and he made sure to never let me follow his path. I am technically a member of an MC. So that is my baddest story. I loved it at the time and now get pretty down whenever I look at my flash. For the most part pretty normal stuff, smoked a haystack, what we didn't sell, drank a lot, one of our cash cows was home distilled spirits, and as the head of security, including legit security gigs we got, lots of posturing and pretty regular brawls. Please note I'm from a country where gun crime isn't so prolific. I did have a couple of friends from outside the club get beat or stabbed to death in relation to the lifestyle, but as far as I know everyone who has ever been a member is still alive. In terms of initiation there wasn't really one, but I made it clear that anyone who didn't want me around could take it up with me, although I did a fair bit of menial dirt for a long time. I grew up close to Chicago and through high school I would visit it frequently, and built up a network of friends through music. Shortly into hanging out, I was jumped in by 4 guys, and earned respect quickly through being very competent and having good ideas. I never really liked to talk about my role or my tasks until I am older, however I have had guns in my face and watched friends die in front of me. Through it I started drinking, smoking weed every day and chain smoking cigarettes, just so I would have something to focus on. I got to the point where I couldn't be alone for more than a minute without remembering getting shot at and chased. In school, I was picked on a lot, but it made me feel tough and respected, even though it was my secret, until I started cutting ties and focusing on an actual career. I hated the life, and that was how everyone else felt around me. Depending on who you ask, if it is a regular runt gang member they will say being in a gang feels like family. You will hear the usual, we rob, use drugs and we jump to initiate new people in. Dropouts and uneducated young people from bad neighborhood or broken family. These are all true, but there are deeper aspect to the gang culture, and successful/powerful ones are more sophisticated than the stereotypical gangbangers depicted in movies or media. In fact, some people referred to as OG could be someone you would never think of being part of a gang. They could be someone who owns a business or even someone holding a regular job. In my group we never mix races, in fact we look down on groups that does this. When they say you are in for life, they mean it. I've seen it all. Throw away for obvious reasons. Had a family member who was in some shady things. He first came into my life when I was 13, and I helped him move into one of my grandfather's houses. I hung around with him from 13 to 16 and was his shadow. Mostly I just saw him giving out loans and talking with people in the construction/trucking business. At late 16/early 17, I became more involved, even moving out of my house for a summer to live with him. I had 2 classic cars and 2 rooms to my own. Some shit went down with a slightly older woman, and I had to move back home and give up my cars. I stayed involved and rose in status. Eventually one day, when asked to check up on someone's whereabouts, not for anything sinister, just to know where they were at, I knew just out of the blue this wasn't for me. I backed out cold turkey just fine. I still see my uncle occasionally and feel sad seeing someone with no real friends sitting at home most days. His kids don't even talk to him. Bad life. Just don't do it. Some of the movies are accurate at times, but you'll either go to jail, get chased out of town, or be a lonely old man. Grew up in a skinhead gang in Southern California. Didn't get jumped in, but definitely had to hang around for a while, fight people, not in the gang, and commit basic crimes like robbery. When they were comfortable with me, they invited me to more advanced criminal tasks, and eventually I just became part of the group. Wore the right clothes to fit in, picked up the proper vernacular, kept my mouth shut, and hit hard. As much as they claim to be against drugs, they all do them. I don't like drugs. Tried them all but never liked them. I sold some drugs, sold large amounts of weapons, and jumped people. I realized that it wasn't what I wanted, that I wasn't happy with myself, and the happiness I thought I would find did not exist, because I hate racist people. Eventually I just lost contact with people and moved away. Never heard from them again. I had a screwed up childhood in and out of foster care. My father passed when I was 10. I also had issues with violence when I was growing up, landing me in juvie. I joined when one of my father's friends reached out to me offering to help. I still am not entirely out. My health is just to the point they have no more use for me, so they leave me alone. My worst memory was when a man angered me on the street, and I ended up following him until it was isolated and hitting him on the back of the head twice with a piece of pipe. I am not sure of what happened to him, as this was 20 years ago at this point.